My fellow writers, we need to talk. Writing is a hard thing to do. And as someone who's been writing over the last decade and published a couple books, I've got something to tell you, something really important to tell you about what happens and how this gets better, how it gets easier. As I have published multiple books and tried to get through it, I've always held on to this one little hope, this hope about writing, and that it's basically that it gets easier. Well, I'm here today to tell you that it doesn't. That's the tough conversation part of this, is that the writing actually doesn't get any easier. In fact, it might even get harder. Okay, so maybe it doesn't necessarily get harder, but perhaps you get a little bit more self-critical. And that's kind of the stuff we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some things that you can do to make writing easier for you. And yeah, it does kind of get a little bit easier the more you do it, like mechanically speaking. You will learn to recognize things better. You will learn to just kind of do things like without having to think about them a little bit better. My grammar, for example, is infinitely better than it was when I first started writing about 10 years ago. Still needs work. It needs a lot of work, but it's still better, right? And I'm at least at the point where I can tell you that my grammar needs work, and that's progress. But there's one specific thing that doesn't get easier, and in fact can be harsher the more you do it, and even when you get some success. And that's the self-doubt that comes with writing. And if you've written anything at this point, or if you're still holding on to that hope of like, one day I'll write, which if you are, fucking do it. Let this be your sign. Just start writing. That's the name of the channel. Just start writing. You can do it. I believe in you. Just start. Once you start, that's the rest of it is easy sailing, except for this part of the video. But that self-doubt still creeps into your mind. It creeps in and it kind of like nestles in there, and it gets nice and cozy, and it gets fucking loud. And so here are 3 techniques you can use to kind of shut it the hell up. First is going to be check in with yourself. If you're being negative about your writing, ask yourself why. If it's just some vague feeling like all of this shit sucks, that should be a red flag. It's impossible for all of it to suck. I'm serious, even the worst writing you've ever read doesn't completely suck. There is something good in it. Maybe it's just one sentence, maybe it's the title, but there's something in that writing that is actually good. So your writing can't also all suck. There's something good in it, I promise. So think inwardly, think about what is causing that feeling. Is it something that you can narrow it down to? Like, okay, you're thinking that this sucks. Well, maybe what you're actually thinking that sucks is this chapter sucks. And then if you think that chapter sucks, well then what is it about the chapter? Is it you just don't like the way that like the flow of it, or you didn't like the dialogue, or you didn't like the characters, or it may be the chapter just feels like it's out of place. I routinely go about taking and like switching my chapters all over the place because I'm like, oh, I wrote this chapter here, but it doesn't actually fit in this place. It needs to be moved somewhere else, and that's totally fine. But if you can't come up with that, if you can't like go from this big feeling of suck, which sounds weird, but if you can't go from this big feeling of suck down to what you're actually experiencing, it might just be some more vague sense of like self-dread, and that's probably tied to imposter syndrome or just fear of failure. And if that's the case, well then welcome, friend, to the author's table, because we all have it and it doesn't get that much better, I'm sorry to tell you. But if you can at least identify it, it becomes more like a nagging thing that you can just shut up and get to it and start writing and start fixing and start doing things that make you feel good about your writing. One of the things that I have noticed recently is listening back to my work with the text-to-speech software actually helps me appreciate my own writing. Just something to consider. And as one final part on this point, if you're writing at all, you've already achieved what a lot of people never will, because a lot of people will never start. A lot of people never just start writing. It's tough. It's hard to get to that point. So you've already started. give yourself some credit for that too. Number 2 is going to be read your own damn writing. Reread it. It sounds simple, but it's important. And it's not just for the reason you're thinking, like, oh, I'm rereading to edit. No, reread your writing for a couple reasons. Reread your old writing and read your newer writing to see where you were and where you're at now. Reread your writing to see the things that you enjoy about your writing, the things that you're like, oh, I like that. Because when we're writing, generally, we're coming to writing because we were readers first. And we know the things that we like when we read. And you can like, I'm here to give you permission, you can like the things you write. It's okay. It's not narcissistic to enjoy the things that you wrote. I mean, fuck, I started writing because I didn't want Dragonlance to end, and so I wrote a bunch of basically really shitty fan fiction. Not even fan fiction, just like oh, vague fantasy, because I wanted more of it. The desire to write for me came from there not being enough reading for me to do. And I know that sounds silly, but that's where it came from. You have a story inside you that you're trying to get out. Read it. As writers, as really any artistry, you can feel so self-critical, and it's important to be self-critical. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying stand in your room and say, oh, all my writing is fantastic and I don't need to do shit. You do. You always need to be working on things. I'm on my 4th book right now, and there are things that I'm like, I really need to work on this because this shit sucks. And that's okay. But I also like, oh, well, this is good. You can like things. You have permission to like your own writing. Be self-critical, but realize it is a very, very thin line between being self-critical and toxic self-annihilation to the point where you just stop. And the last one, the 3rd one, is going to basically just be enlist help. If after this you are still feeling bad about your writing, or perhaps you've pinpointed a less vague reason, for example, let's say you fear your story isn't interesting or your characters aren't compelling, reach out to someone you trust. A fellow author, a beta reader, a friend, someone that is willing to give you some kind of critique and some honest feedback, both good and bad. People that are willing to read it and give you their honest opinion. And I have found in the past that it really helps, and this is something just like a general idea, especially like if you're giving stuff to beta readers, have some specific thing that you can give them. So if you have narrowed down this thing and you want to, you're asking about it, and say like, give them a specific worry. Like, hey, this chapter, I'm worried that my characters are boring as shit. Do you think they're boring? Because then they can tell you, yes, I think they're boring. And then you can cut the chapter. Has it ever happened to me? Yes, it has. But that's the point. Getting a different set of eyes can be huge, because maybe they aren't boring. Maybe you are just being very, very overly critical. Hopefully all of this helps a little bit and you feel a little bit more inspired to go forth and write, because damn it, we need your writing. Especially in the age of AI that we're going into. We need your fucking writing. So please just start writing. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.